Hey, Jen.
Good day. How are you?
I'm good. Just waiting on Dawn.
All right. I put my phone on silent.
Oh, hang on. I'm turning up there. What was that?
Nothing. I'm just talking to myself.
Oh, okay. There he is.
Okay.
Morning,
Yep.
sir.
Let me just PowerPoint up here. It's birds and bird habitats.
Ani, Don.
Hey Jen, how's it going?
Good. Boy, you're loud.
Am
Alright.
I? I looked at that budget stuff, Jen.
Yep.
I don't see anything for actual individual community meetings.
Just
So I
when
have
you
to
guys were
drop that
live,
down
just in
into the
case.
other one. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, like we need like what we should do is come up with an estimated number. Like there's 22 communities, right, that theoretically we have to visit, and there might be, I don't know, a couple of 2 or 3 potential visits. So we take a proportion of those, right, and budget that out. So we're missing a lot, I think, in there because we should always anticipate and assume, right, that we're going to be doing in-person meetings. That's what I always
Yeah.
used to do, like budget. And I don't think it's there. I don't see it there. I don't know what those tours are,
I think that's what they're supposed to be.
but
I'll just change the words.
yeah, but like but there should be like a lot of them, right? Like we should assume a lot of them, just worst case scenario, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Otherwise we could end up short.
I'll just grab the budget from last year.
Yeah, because didn't we have that in there last year?
Mm-hmm.
I thought we did. Because it was a lot more, wasn't it? I thought it was anyway. I was trying to decipher
Certainly
that there.
was.
I thought it was because I was looking at this and I'm like, where are the individual meetings? Maybe they were in there, but I couldn't find them.
Okay.
I'm about to go quiet in the studio here, but I just want to remind you guys that I'm flying solo today. So if I'm not on the right slide or whatever, just let me know.
Okay.
Because
Yep.
I've got double duties today, so I may or may
Yeah,
not
yeah. Okay.
be paying perfect attention.
Mm-hmm.
Maestro, slide mover,
Exactly.
or page turner and maestro.
All the above.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the voice. Are you going to jump in with us?
Oh, not at all. I won't even be paying attention to what you guys are saying. You could mock
Not
me
at
the whole
all.
show. I would never know.
I like that. Not at
He's
all.
not even gonna listen to us.
No, I don't think he is.
Well, I
I
will
don't
be
think he
alone.
wants to.
What?
I gotta make sure the sound is coming out of your mouths.
What?
Okay, I'm gonna go quiet in the studio. So good luck, guys, and stick around after
Okay.
the show because we'll talk further.
Yep.
Good luck, guys.
Thank you. All right.
Are you ready, Don?
I am, yes.
Are
Okay.
you ready? I sound like one of those boxing announcements.
That's right.
Are
Are you
you
ready to
ready to
rumble?
rumble?
That's right. Then he legs on that for a while. I
Yeah.
love that. That guy's super famous, eh? The guy that had like who did that originally,
Yeah.
he gets brought into all kinds of events to do the same thing, and he works for like 30 seconds, and that's it.
And our heavyweight champion of the year, Mike Tyson.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. He just keeps going. He's super famous, that guy. I can't remember his name now. He's big in
Me
Las
neither, but
Vegas, that's
it's
for sure.
fun.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'm a senior consultation specialist with Atkins Realis. Today, we are continuing our series of live stream topics on the Northern Road Link project as it moves through the provincial environmental assessment and federal impact assessment processes. The topics we are covering parallel our project activities, so we hope these will help our viewers and listeners better understand the project and provide input along the way. With me today is my usual co-host, Jennifer Ashwazagay Pereira, my colleague and an Indigenous engagement and traditional knowledge specialist at Atkins Realis. Jennifer is a member of Henvey Inlet First Nation, located on the French River south of Sudbury, and works with me on our projects across Canada. So let's get started, Jen. Today we're going to talk about birds and bird habitat study plan that we're undertaking as part of the environmental and impact assessment. So,
Very cool.
an, yeah, another important topic to cover. So, as we usually do, we're going to do a run through of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to lead off with background information on the project. We're going to talk about uh, identification of valued components, indicators, data collection, data analysis, identification and characterization of residual effects. That's the effects left over after mitigation or trying to limit or eliminate project effects from the project. Cumulative effects assessment, where we look at the project in the context of neighboring projects, and then finish things off with a discussion of follow-up and monitoring programs, and as well commitments made during the EA and IA process. So with that, Jen, let's do a little bit of a background on the project. Do you want to jump in and do the background?
Sure, I think I can do that, Don. So the Northern
Why,
Road
thank
Link
you, Jen.
project. Well, you're very welcome, Don. So the Northern Road Link project is a proposed all-season road in Treaty 9, which is Northern Ontario, and it will connect the Ring of Fire mineral deposits to the all-season highway network through the proposed Martin Falls Community Access Road. So that's going to connect to the provincial highway system. And it'll also provide a chance for Webequie First Nation to connect to the all-season highway network as well. So Webequie Supply Road is going to connect to the Northern Road Link, and the Northern Road Link is going to connect to the Martin Falls Community Access Road. And so all of these roads, including the Northern Road Link, is subject to the Environmental Assessment Act as well as the Impact Assessment Act. And so most importantly, I think, is the proponent is Martin Falls and Webequie First Nations. And they are remote fly-in communities 500 kilometers north of Thunder Bay, and they're not currently accessible by all season roads. And they have they're accessible through, of course, planes and in the wintertime, the winter road network. And we know, and we've been hearing a lot about how the road season has been changing and getting shorter every year. And I think this past winter, 2023, 2024, it was what, 4 to 6 weeks, Don?
Yeah,
And
somewhere in that range.
yeah, pretty short. And that's a short amount of time to try and get that many supplies into the community for infrastructure and other things. So we know also that there have been numerous historical studies for road studies. And 4 years ago in 2020, Ontario, Martin Falls First Nation, and Webequie First Nation agreed to work together, and the First Nations agreed to conduct a provincial environmental assessment, which is funded by the province of Ontario. So I think that is about it for the background, Don. And I think you'll jump into the interaction with the two other proposed roads.
That's right, Jen. So there's three all-season road projects that are currently in the planning process. They're all going through provincial environmental assessments and federal impact assessments. The furthest north one is the Webequie Supply Road project, which is planned to run from the airport in Webequie southeast to east of the Mukatai River in the McFalds Lake area, where it would connect with the northern end of the planned Northern Road Link Road, which then extends south to join the Martin Falls Community Access Road west of Martin Falls. And then that road extends south where it connects with a couple of, it connects with a resource road, which then connects, I believe, with another resource road. And these roads would ultimately be upgraded. And then those resource roads ultimately connect with the provincial highway network. So overall, the purpose of the Northern Road Link project is to enable economic activity, helping with the transportation of goods, materials, and resources as well. And next, we move to talking about the project components, and it it is more than just a two-lane road. There are other infrastructure components, some temporary, some permanent, that are associated with it. The road itself would range in length between 117 and 164 kilometers. The reason why we don't have a specific length at this point is that we currently are in the process of finalizing the selection of different road segments at different locations. And once we do that and have them all connected together, we'll have like a definite length for the road. But right now it ranges
Mhm.
between 117 and 164 kilometers, and the actual right of way would be 100 meters. And then we have water crossings, Jen, and there are, as you can
Mhm.
imagine, lots of water crossings, mainly culverts. They will be mainly culverts, but some bridges, and the largest bridge crossing would be that of the Attawapiskat River, which is a greater than 200-meter bridge crossing. And then we have what we call ancillary infrastructure, so infrastructure other than the road. So this would consist of things like storage and laydown areas for materials and equipment, and these areas would be temporary during construction. Then you have maintenance facilities and yards. Um, these would be permanent because they're associated with the operation and maintenance of the road. You have access roads. These are typically associated with like infrastructure such as pits and quarries. And so they may also, these access roads may also have water crossings if the water needs to be crossed on the way to, for example, the pits and quarries. You have aggregate sites, which I just talked about, the pits and quarries where the material is obtained to build and maintain the road. And then there's construction camps, which are, of course, temporary during the construction periods to accommodate the workers. So we also have alternative corridors, Jen, don't we? And
Mhm.
maybe you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, wow. There's a few.
You
There's
don't have to
12.
talk in detail about them. Yeah, yeah.
12 alternative corridor segments. And since we are live streaming, you can look at the map and you see these different sections. So you see the green, the blue, the pink sections. So each of those corridors are 2 kilometers wide to allow for routing around any areas that are deemed sensitive in any kind of way. And the various segments are possible to put together a full corridor for the project. So we still have to measure them, Don, each of those segments.
Yes,
Remember, we were
yes.
thinking about doing that at one
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
And of course, this road also, the length of the road kind of also depends on the route for the Martin Falls Community Access Road. So if you see the map, you see the 2 sections west of Martin Falls. So if they pick the section that's a little bit more north, that means the length of the Northern Road Link road will be a little shorter, of course. And then if Martin Falls decides to go south along their segment, then the Northern Road Link would be extended to meet up with that. So,
Yeah, so once we finish that process, which I think we're very close to finalizing,
mhm,
Jen, then everything will be, the segments will all then be sort of sewn together, and then we're going to have that 2 kilometer wide corridor, right?
mhm,
Which is to give us the wiggle room, right, as we call it, to
yes,
because remember the right of way is only 100 meters in width, and so when you have a 2 kilometer wide corridor, that gives you some room to go around things that you didn't know about before. So, for example, if community members identify something that's really significant to them, whether it's culturally or environmentally for whatever reason, um, we can make adjustments within that 2 kilometer
mhm,
wide corridor. So that's good to have. And
yeah,
again, that
and
should be finalized pretty soon.
it's important to get that feedback.
Yes, absolutely, right? We go through a process of reaching out to communities and community members to get their feedback, and then we go through a technical process where we look at the impact on various important like valued components, important things to consider, and including environment and environmental sensitivity. And we go through that process, combine it with the input we've received from Indigenous community members, from the general public, from uh, special interest groups, various groups. And then from there, we come up with selections for preferred alternatives, and then we have that preferred corridor that comes out of that
Mhm,
process. So next, we're going to talk a bit about uh, the valued components for birds and birds habitat. So valued components are the basically the important things that should be studied, and they're typically identified by um, the in some cases government agencies, by professionals working in the field, by communities and community members, indigenous communities and community members, the general public as well too. So these valued components typically form the basis for what is studied in the environmental assessments and the impact assessments. And in our case, when it comes to birds and bird habitat, um, the valued component is made up of what you call is made up of 6 what you call guilds, and guilds are groups of species. So you have things like forest birds or raptors. Raptors includes eagles and hawks, birds of prey, shorebirds, waterfowl, bog and fen birds, and wetland obligate birds. So these 6 guilds or groups of different species, but the species have something in common, and then what's in common um, to them is not only their genetics, but also their habitat, right? Um,
mhm,
so those are the 6 guilds that that make up the valued component, what's studied for birds and bird habitat. Um, and again, these were selected because they're guilds of value to Indigenous communities, government agencies, the public, technical experts, right? Stakeholders, and it's all, they've been identified based on all the consultation and public review that's occurred to date. So let's talk a bit now, Jen, about indicators, and just to remind everyone, indicators are ways of measuring potential impacts. So associated with valued components, you have indicators, right? These ways of measuring potential impact. So let's go through some of these for birds and bird habitat. So you've got abundance and distribution. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, abundance means number of, right? Like how many. So what we're looking at is, from the project, in terms of effects of the project, does it affect the number of birds of a particular species? So that's what we're talking about. And then when we're talking about distribution, we're talking about the geographic distribution, so where those bird species are found. So you can have direct changes to the population through animals being, killed as a direct result of physical activities of the project, or you could have what you call indirect changes to the population, um, where there might be impacts on habitat availability, quantity, and quality, and that may affect the survival and of the species and the ability of the species to reproduce as well. So then we have, as another indicator, we have habitat availability. So when we talk about habitat availability, we're talking about um, quantity of habitat, quality of habitat, configuration of that habitat. So how it's arranged, right? Is it, and then connectivity. So configuration could be the shape of that habitat.
Hmm.
Connectivity is it connected to other similar areas? Because if you have connected habitats, it probably functions more effectively than if you had separate habitats like islands of habitats. So that's an important one to keep in mind. So the question is, does the project have any impact on the availability of habitat? So habitat availability is the indicator, right? It's the thing to measure potential impact of the project. Then you've got something called species richness, and species richness talks about diversity, right? So the mix, the combination of the composition of species in a particular area, in the project area. So, um, there could be direct changes to the species presence, right, which affects the richness or the diversity, species diversity in the area. Um, but there could be indirect changes to this composition or population matrix or mix of species as a result of things like changes to availability of habitat, like the amount of habitat or the type of habitat. So that's another indicator to measure potential impacts on birds and birds habitat. And there's another indicator called species habitat specificity, and that's where you get into um, impacts on. So you're looking at the habitat and looking at the different types of habitat very specifically, because habitat
Hmm.
can be broken down into even more categories. There's specific types of habitat for different life stages for species, and so that's another measure. And then finally, we have predation and habitat usage, and human access. So uh, we all have to remember that humans are predators. So if the road increased access for more humans to enter an area, potentially that means more predators, and that can have impacts on populations of different species because it's increased hunting access. There could be increased raptor, I mean birds of prey and mammal predation because of easier access, maybe for wolves or bears or other predators like that. So that's another indicator, another way of measuring potential impacts, Jen. So there's a lot of indicators, and
Yes, there are.
yeah, and there's a lot of work that goes into um, identifying ultimately potential impacts of the project when it comes to these different indicators. But um, because of course, first you got to figure out what you have first, right? You have to do the baseline studies to identify, what's there and how much of it is there, and then you have to look at what potential impacts there might be, and we'll get into that in our next slide when we talk about data collection. And so on the desktop side, one of the biggest and most important activities, because it feeds different other activities, is habitat classification. So looking at the land and classifying the habitat. And this is an exercise that's not a fast exercise. It requires a lot of experience, a trained eye. So it involves interpretation of satellite imagery or aerial photography, and other information. And then what happens is experts start drawing lines on maps to identify specific vegetation communities or natural features. And again, the
Hmm.
idea is to be able to get an understanding of habitat, right? So habitat talks about, it basically refers to where these animals and these birds in particular live, right? And
Yeah,
different species have.
like a black
Sorry, Jen, go
spruce
ahead.
stand, for instance.
Yeah. So certain species of birds prefer, certain habitats, right? And even at different life stages, they move from one particular area to another particular area for different reasons. So that's why it's so important as a baseline activity to get that habitat classification work done. And we also rely on government databases. So we sign data use agreements, but we we access those government databases and use that information to help sort of paint that picture of what is there in terms of habitat and looking at and vegetation as well, because vegetation is a key component of habitat and helps to a large extent defines the areas that different bird species use. And then all this information that we gather through the desktop work helps us in designing the field program. So we know which areas to go, or we can identify areas where we want to do surveys to help us better understand impacts. Because remember, Jen, right? What we're trying to do ultimately is identify impacts of the project. So
Hmm.
we got to paint that picture. So if we move to the next slide, let's talk a little bit about the different types of surveys that are undertaken. So in terms of field data, we've got breeding bird point counts, where like a trained biologist would go to a specific location for a specific period of time and count birds that they observe and identify the distance at which they observe them or hear them as well. Sometimes you don't see them, you
Hmm.
just hear them. Acoustic bird surveys, where they set up these sort of listening devices um, at different locations, so they can, and then they track, these listening devices record um, the sounds, and then that information is then run through software to help identify what species were making those sounds, those bird calls, and then that gives again you an idea as the expert of as to like what birds are living where, right? What habitat are they occupying? And then you have
And
what you call, what's that, Jen?
and it requires a lot of patience for some of
Yes.
these bird
Yeah.
surveys because our biologists are literally sitting in the wherever and listening and looking, and sometimes they get eaten by bugs.
Yes, they do. That's right. Yeah, it's it's patient work. It requires a lot of experience. Our bird experts have spent a lot of time um, listening to bird calls and training their ears and their eyes to identify species. They also conduct what you call crepuscular bird surveys, and crepuscular is a big word, but what it really means is dawn or dusk birds. So the birds that are there before sunrise and before sunset. So because you get different activities, different
Mm-hmm.
species are quite active at those times. So then you have waterfowl migration surveys. As we know, there's a lot of waterfowl that migrate through the study area, um, you know, both going north and going back south again at different times a year. And so we try to understand that dynamic as well too, like where they stop over, areas that they use as part of doing that important activity as well. And then we do shorebird surveys as well. And then there's observations made on raptor nests. Typically,
Mm-hmm.
that's done when we do aerial surveys. We've done it, I know, a lot as part of the caribou, winter caribou surveys, where they're able to, because there's no leaves on the trees, they're able to identify stick nests. Location where the stick nests are the ones that are made by the big birds of prey. So that's really helpful. Those observations are very helpful in terms of identifying use areas by raptors or birds of prey. And in terms of desktop analysis, I was talking a little bit about this before. There's a lot of different
Mm-hmm.
layers of data that are used in trying to paint that picture of what the way things are. And so we'll look at things like land cover, meaning the type of land or type of terrain uh, that that is in different locations. We look at soils. We look at geomorphology, and that's a big word that basically means sort of the structure and function of the land. It's similar to land cover, I guess, to a degree, but it's more looking at, different land types have different functions, like an esker, it's formed through different geological activities and it has sort of a unique features. So that's what we talk about when we talk about geomorphology. Um, Hydrological processes. So when we talk about hydrological, we're talking about surface water. So drainage patterns, for example, and then climatic conditions, understanding, um, maybe certain areas have certain climate characteristics, and then just bird survey data. So combining all this stuff together helps paint that picture that we need in order to be able to identify potential impacts. Then again, Jen, too, we get into what's called residual effects, right? Where
Oh.
we we do that famous, we use that word this word all the time, mitigation, and mitigation is that word that talks about how to like sort of eliminate or reduce impacts. Well, it doesn't always work completely. So sometimes you have effects from a project that are left over, and these leftover effects are called residual effects. So these residual effects have different characteristics that you can, ways that you can describe them. So you have direction, like as positive, negative, or neutral, meaning no direction.
Mm-hmm.
Magnitude, like how much. Geographic extent, over what area is the effect? Does the effect occur? Duration, for how long does the effect occur? Frequency, how often does it occur? Reversibility, does it go back to the way it was? Likelihood, what is the chance of something happening? And then confidence, how certain are you that a residual effect could actually happen? So that's how we sort of characterize or describe residual effects. And then when we take the residual effects from the project, we also have to recognize that the project doesn't sit by itself, does it, Jen?
No.
In on the land and water, there's other things going on around it, right? And all these things together have to be looked at. So that's where we get into what you call cumulative effects assessment, where we look at the project in the context, right? So together
Mm-hmm.
with any other past projects, current projects, or projects that we think are what they call reasonably foreseeable, likely to occur. So, and there's a definition associated with that. But so what we do is we look at all the residual effects of these past projects, the current projects, and potential future projects, and we put them all together, and then we look at it and say, can we mitigate these on a regional basis? And so that's what we talk about when we talk about cumulative effects assessment. And then, last but not least, we have a really important exercise, which is the follow-up and monitoring programs and commitments. So follow-up and monitoring programs, you use them to test how accurate your effects assessment is, and how effective the mitigation measures have been. So it's sort of that report card, that check, right? To see how things are going, and if things aren't going well, or if there's areas that, there's things that are occurring that you didn't expect to occur that are negative, then there needs to be action taken, right, to address that. So the need for a follow-up program depends on the results of the assessment and consultation with Indigenous communities and regulators, people who are just interested, and other possible stakeholders as well. And then we get to commitments, and the commitments are made during the environmental assessment and impact assessment process. So these commitments are then, if the project is approved to proceed, these commitments are checked to see that they are being met as well too. So there's the most important point that come out of this, of what I'm saying is that there are ways of checking to make sure, and double checking to make sure that nothing surprising is coming out of the project in terms of impacts, and if there are surprises or things that we can mitigate by just doing changing certain aspects of the project, then we can do that. So anyway, my point is that this is where typically these occur. These activities occur, of course, after approval of an EA or an IA. They may occur for like a definite period of time, like a limited period of time, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Or sometimes they are expected to be done in perpetuity, meaning forever. So this is quite often an area where Indigenous community members can participate in the project, right, in the follow-up and the monitoring of the project to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. So anyway, an important stage of the overall process for sure. So Jen, that wraps up our discussion today on birds and bird habitat, the study plan of those, and we hope this was helpful for everyone, and encourages you to join us again in a couple of weeks, because we're going to be in a couple of weeks we're going to come back and talk about the Indigenous Knowledge Program, including funding opportunities and collaboration. So that'll be a good topic. We'll have
And
well, a guest or two, right? A guest or
yes.
two on that, and so we'll have some special guests, I think. And so don't forget to keep in touch with our project team members and via the contact information available on our website, northernroadlink.ca. Miigwech, and make sure to look out for project updates on social media and our website.
Bamaki.